flow. And habitat modeling indicates that the amount supports 5% of the native habitat. You see in the information that was given us by Parks and Wildlife that the fish population below that band and to the confluence is basically, it does not, so the fish comes from the San Miguel River. Moreover, and this really goes to Director Hoppy's questions, the brunt of protecting these fish is falling on Colorado because we have the best population of these fish. And so what we're hearing is that this stretch on the Dolores has the best habitat for these fish. So if we're ever going to try to do anything to avoid an Endangered Species Act, this is the time to act. This is now. I believe that avoiding an endangered species listing is very much in balance with balancing the needs of man and the needs for future water development. I also want to point out that the staff memo says that there's 533,000 acre feet of conditional water rights in the Dolores River Basin. I went back and looked at our basin implementation plan, and our entire 2050 M&I gap for the entire basin, which is the Dolores Basin is just like one of 9 basins, is about 8,800 to 16,000. Our conditional water rights in the Dolores are extremely above what we would ever need to fulfill a gap. The opposers talk about the little guy and how we should not burden them with creating storage. Well, anyone who has water rights in the San Miguel or on the Dolores, we've been creating augmentation ponds forever. It's just part of the way it works, and that's because of the way the river is controlled. On the San Miguel side, it is controlled by the CC ditch. Those are extremely senior water rights, and they control the river all the way up to Telluride. And that is why Telluride and Norwood, they've dealt with their water rights for a long time because they know what it means if they were to be called out by the CC ditch. On the Dolores side, where there's very little development down below the McPhee Dam, the McPhee controls. And anybody knows they have to deal with that. Anyway, we all know that the little guy, he's going to have to build a pond. It's just the way it works. I am very, very concerned about the precedent of a carve-out. I think this is dangerous precedent. And what makes our in-stream flow program work is the fact that it is part of our prior appropriation system. By asking for a carve-out, no matter how small, we're basically going against the face of the prior appropriation system. And I don't see the opposers going to the Dolores River Conservancy District and asking for a small carve-out from their storage in McPhee Dam to release for the little guy. I mean, that would be preposterous, right? Because it completely flies in the face of the prior appropriation system. So why are we willing to even think about doing that with the in-stream flow program? This isn't the time to weaken our in-stream flow program, especially when we have the BLM, which is coming forward with an unprecedented approach to working with us for wild and scenic suitability. It is this type of a partnership agreement, which is the very essence of why we need a strong in-stream flow program. It's also not the right time with the public trust doctrines that are going around. I mean, I think if we were to weaken the in-stream flow program, we're just asking for more of the public trust doctrine. I would suggest that the middle amount minus anything, minus 1 penny, is not enough. And the in-stream flow statute already isn't enough water, in my opinion. It's the minimal amount. How can you decrease that? So with that, when I would like the board to have more time, but when you're ready, I would like to make a recommendation. I'm not.
Director Wells?
Now, I don't know if we need a motion yet, but I wanted to address some of the issues as well. I think probably neither extreme of the legal arguments that were made is true. I don't think that correlation with the activities of mankind, I don't think that's a statutory duty, so it's not a mandate. I also don't think it's prohibited. It probably is encompassed within avoiding impacts to water rights. And it's certainly something we always talk about. And I think that, for example, doing something to avoid listing a species of concern does just exactly that. It looks at protecting the activities of mankind, which would certainly be adversely impacted by a listing of these species. So I think there is some discretion for us to address such issues. I think that what's been proposed, a depletion allowance of some amount, is neither an appropriate approach nor does it seem to be necessary in this case. First, there are other mechanisms available. The conditional water rights that have been mentioned are important. The Montrose County, which is I now know where this in-stream flow segment is located, did what should have been done. They took the year delay and they applied for a conditional water right for storage. And tomorrow they will probably be receiving WSRA grant money to do a feasibility study to determine which of the potential storage sites should be pursued. So the CWCB is involved in helping this basin develop rights so that the future, even the little guy, can get water. In addition, there is the 1% de minimis policy where little guys who come in and get little bitty water rights don't get impacted, and there's the injury with mitigation. So there are other avenues to address potential future small development. And then the other side of that is I can't see any evidence that an allowance is necessary. The people who are in charge of growth and development, Montrose County, for example, and the cities and towns in this area are not here. They're not objecting. They believe that they have taken care of development. There doesn't seem to be much private land. I was trying to figure out where this little guy would wander in and need to take water out of the river from. So this is really, it's being asked as a matter of policy. It's being asked as a matter of principle. In-stream flows near the state water line shouldn't take the water that's necessary. It should leave some on the table. Perhaps in some other basin, in some other circumstance, the facts would justify such a development allowance. I just don't see it here. We're talking about a hypothetical individual at a hypothetical location with a hypothetical need that can probably be addressed some other way. You take that hypothetical person and you weigh it against the important needs that are being addressed in this flow. The needs of the environment, the economy of this area that relies on recreation and the environment, all the other water users who could be adversely impacted by a listing. So it seems to me in the final analysis, the balance of public interest isn't really close. In addition to the damage that it might do to the in-stream flow program, in this circumstance, in this basin with these facts, I just can't see a need for a carve out. So that's, you can tell how I'm going to vote when the time comes. Thank you.
Any other comments before someone makes a motion?
Thank you, Casey. I think Director Wells said things very eloquently, and I've learned a lot through going through this process. I don't think it's any secret that I'm not really a big fan of in-stream flows in large amounts, and sometimes not in small amounts. But I think the staff presented their case pretty well here, actually very well. But I think it points out the need for our board and primarily our board, to have a workshop and really meet with other folks and discuss the policy aspects. And I'd like to defer to Director Eklund to set that up, but I think that there is a lot to discuss. And but I think our staff just did a great job on this case.
Are you making a motion?
Absolutely not. Unless it's no. No, I would let Director Montgomery make her own motion in her district.
I want to make sure everybody on the board has had the opportunity to weigh in. Any other comments? Okay.
Yeah.
So, seeing no comments now, I would make a motion to accept staff recommendation, as well as, I don't know if I need to add this, but exercise our discretion to approve the 2 stipulation agreements.
Second. Discussion.
Everybody, is there a discussion on the stipulations? On the stipulations only? Are you making a motion for both?
I said I did it all at once. Staff
Okay,
recommendations
so
and the
I'm
stipulations.
accepting the stipulations and accepting the staff's recommendation on the Dolores in-stream flow. Mr. Smith?
Thank you. I'd also like to just recognize the hard work staff. I questioned why the opposers didn't bring experts to challenge the analysis. We have a couple of different ways to do the analysis: the physical habitat simulation model, the R2 cross that we're all very familiar with. I guess I take that as a sign that it wasn't the flow amounts that's being challenged here. It's more these policy issues. I will keep my homily to a minimum here, but I agree with Director Hoppe. I think with the development of the water plan, the in-stream flow program is maturing. When you have large appropriations that are being recommended by the agencies, it comes with lots of other questions and lots of other issues. I look forward to more conversation about what the minimum and the optimum terms that I heard this morning about: guaranteed habitat, providing habitat, efficient flows, and sufficient flows. I think that's what our future looks like as the in-stream flow program matures, and I'm sure we'll have other applications in the future. And I see it as just a progression now of the in-stream flow program, 40 years of a successful program, but now it comes with other issues. The discussion about board discretion. So I looked up the definition of discretion: freedom to decide what should be done. The power or right to decide or act according to one's own judgment. I think that's what we'll be wrestling with. What is the board's obligation, authority, and discretion? And I think we'll have some more discussion about that. So, Casey, thanks for allowing time for comments.
My pleasure. Commissioner Hamel?
Well, I also want to compliment staff. As I was plowing through the many pages of materials and thinking about 900 CFS, they were very helpful in educating me the importance of thinking of each stream, whether it's a little stream and needs 2 or 3 CFS, or a Colorado main stem, or some other river like the Arkansas and in the Arkansas basin, and they were very, very helpful. Appreciated all the dialogue today, and I plan to vote to support the motion. I do think some continued dialogues continuing. I'm still, as one board member, of course, I'm easily confused, but on what is the board's options when it comes to discussions like this. This will now include, because of the one stipulation with the Dolores, some compact language, as I understand it, and what we approved at the last board meeting. I think that's important. And so as we go from the creation of the basin implementation plans, the Colorado Water Plan, so that we do have a balance in Colorado, because I think each basin is going to be looking to do more multi-purpose projects that benefit all those uses that we enjoy and want to preserve in Colorado. So I think some continued dialogue on the policy side for this board is very important. But thank you.
Anybody else? You guys ready for a vote? Okay. How many in favor of supporting the staff recommendation for the Dolores in-stream flow, including the stipulations read at the first part of the hearing? Larry, raise your hand. Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. It's unanimous.
5 seconds.
Ha! Is that timing or what?
I have a question. Casey, I have a question.
Yes?
Do we need to consider the stipulation? I couldn't hear.
We did, it was included in the
Was
motion.
included? I couldn't because of my hearing and some of the dialogue that was going
Yeah.
on, almost person to person.
Well, so what I heard was just the stipulation
Okay.
It's like,
that covered.
it's like an extra value meal.
Yeah.
The,
I got extra value meal. Okay.
Thanks again for the audience. I'm getting ready to make that also. Commissioner Mitt, you might have to sit down and listen.
CWCB will come back to order, and we'll continue now with an in-stream flow hearing on Terror Creek, and we'll turn it over to Casey Spall, our hearing officer.
Hi. If there are any folks in the audience who wanted to make a comment on Terror Creek in the public comment period, could you fill out one of the little slips on the table and give it to our folks over here, and they will pass it on to me?
Does that include Terror Creek itself?
No, I believe Terror Creek
Your schedule?
has a scheduled time, so you're okay. Just any other member of the public who's not already on the schedule. Okay, now I know there's an upper and a lower Terror Creek. The way we have set up the testimony is that they're combined. So if there are distinctions to be made between the two, please make them when you're making your statements. And Linda, do we need two separate motions or is one sufficient? One? Okay, great. So first, the CWCB staff will present its proposal for an in-stream flow, and they have 20 minutes.
Good afternoon, Linda Bassi with the Stream and Lake Protection Section. Today, staff will recommend that the board take final action on the proposed Terror Creek in-stream flow water rights. Excuse me. First, I'm going to give you a little bit of history. Bowie Resources LLC, Ragged Mountain Water Users Association, the North Fork Water Conservancy District, and the Overland Ditch and Reservoir Company filed and subsequently withdrew notices to contest in this matter, and those are at tabs 9 and 10 in the notebook. The Terror Ditch and Reservoir Company filed a notice to contest and is the remaining objector and a party to this hearing. These in-stream flow water rights are important because they will protect flows through key habitat that supports native cutthroat trout and speckled dace, a diverse riparian community, and a robust aquatic insect community. They also further our partnership with BLM on protecting natural resources on federal lands through our state's in-stream flow program. CWCB staff, the AG's office, the BLM, and Colorado Parks and Wildlife will provide testimony and evidence today that will support the board's statutory determinations that for these recommended in-stream flows, a natural environment exists, that the natural environment will be preserved by the water available for the recommended appropriation, and no material injury to other water rights will occur. This afternoon, Jeff Basler of CWCB staff, Roy Smith of BLM, and Jay Skinner of Colorado Parks and Wildlife will address the three determinations that we'll ask the board to make at the end of the hearing. Assistant Attorney General Derek Turner will address legal issues related to this hearing. Staff has provided you with a hearing notebook. Some of you have hard copies and you all have it electronically. It contains all the documents related to this matter, and we request that the board formally accept all the material in the notebook into the record for the hearing. Thank you.
Does the board agree to accept all the material into the record? You can just say aye, yes.
Madam Hearing Officer, I move that we accept the materials presented by the staff into the record.
Do we hear a second? Great. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. The materials are in the record.
Good afternoon. For the record, Jeff Basler, Water Conservation Board staff. I want to begin again with a vicinity map to show you where Terror Creek is located. You are in Montrose. If you head north to Delta and then head up towards Paonia, Terror Creek Basin and in-stream flow segments that are being recommended are just north of Paonia. They're tributary to the North Fork of the Gunnison. If we zoom in on that map, there are a number of things that I want to point out with regard to the Terror Creek Basin. First of all, this is West Fork of Terror Creek. This is East Fork of Terror Creek. Main stem of Terror Creek starts at that point right there. There's an existing in-stream flow on a tributary to the West Fork of Terror Creek. That's Cunningham Creek. There is Bruce Park Reservoir, which is located on the East Fork of Terror Creek. It imports water from another basin and then delivers that water downstream to structures. There are a number of stream gauges that staff looked at in its water availability analysis. We focused on the Terror Creek mouth at mouth near Bowie USGS gauge. There are two segments of the Terror Creek in-stream flow. There's an upper segment and a lower segment. The original recommendation from the Bureau of Land Management actually went from the confluence of the East and West Fork of Terror Creek all the way down to the Faucet Ditch, which isn't shown on this map. Staff met with the recommending entities twice early on in the process. We, as part of our stakeholder outreach, we met with the Terror Ditch Company and to try to address their concerns. We also met with Delta County Commissioners and the other parties that Linda had mentioned. During those discussions, we were, of course, looking to see what their concerns were. One of the concerns was that the Terror Ditch is a senior priority and takes most of the water during irrigation season, and that therefore water wouldn't be available for the in-stream flow. Staff, when it did its water availability analysis, confirmed this. We looked at the lower reach, and we did not believe that water was available, consistent with what the ditch company was telling us. However, water was available for this lower reach during the peak runoff season. And so in discussing this with BLM decided to bifurcate the reach, or staff decided to bifurcate the reach, look at the reaches separately, but they still wanted to move forward with an appropriation on that lower reach for that seasonal flow. You can see the two recommendations: typical in-stream flow, winter and summer flow amounts, and then the 4.2 CFS that just goes basically from April 1st through May 31st. We also moved the segment up from the Faucet Ditch to the Fire Mountain Canal. That concern was brought up by Ms. Dixie Luke, who was part of the Ragged Mountain Exchange, and she was concerned that this in-stream flow, if it crossed the Fire Mountain Canal, they had plans to potentially pipe that canal in the future, and she was afraid that the in-stream flow would interfere with that effort if they ever decided to do that. We discussed that with her, told her that the in-stream flow would not be able to interfere with that, but regardless, in order to address her concern, we moved the lower terminus upstream to the Fire Mountain Canal. The three determinations, which you're here to hear about today, I'm going to go over those briefly. There is a natural environment, as Linda mentioned. There's rich riparian habitat, aquatic macroinvertebrates, native cutthroat trout, and speckled dace in both reaches. Water availability, staff performed water availability, the analysis based on our standard methods that we use on all in-stream flows. We use the best available data and the best analysis method for that data. Median stream flows based on diversion records and stream gauge data. In this case, we use that lower gauge. It has 13 years of record from 2001 through 2013. We also had diversion records for the Terror Ditch that we looked at. That had an extensive period of record of 44 years, from 1969 to 2013. Real briefly, these are the hydrographs that were generated to determine whether or not water was available and to make recommendations on any adjustments that needed to be made in the recommendation based on water availability. The black line is the gauge data. You don't see those typical confidence interval limits on that because there's only 10 years of data, and statistically you can't make reasonable confidence intervals on such a limited period or such a limited amount of data. However, with that longer period of record, you can see that gray shaded area. So there are upper confidence limit or upper 95% confidence interval on the diversion data. As you can see, the in-stream flow, which is the blue line, is always below that upper 95% confidence interval or the median for the gauge in all circumstances, and so therefore we say water is available for the upper reach. Moving to the lower reach, again, this is the segment where we're looking at a seasonal appropriation, and you can see the appropriation of 4.2 CFS. Plenty of water is available looking at the gauge data for this seasonal recommendation. Finally, because Terra Creek in-stream flows are new junior water rights, the in-stream flows can exist without material injury to other water rights. In our discussion with the Terra Creek ditch and the other stakeholders prior to their exiting this case, we offered to recognize any 1023B existing practices. None were brought forth, but if any were to be brought forth either now or in the future, we would of course still recognize those. With that, I'm going to turn the podium over to the BLM for their testimony. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Good afternoon. For the record, I'm Roy Smith from the BLM. I'm the statewide in-stream flow and water rights coordinator for the BLM. We're pleased to bring this recommendation to you on 2 reaches of Terra Creek, a really nice natural environment that BLM thinks is worthy of some flows to help support and protect that environment. First of all, as Jeff mentioned, the natural environment to be preserved consists of, first of all, fish. These are pictures from the BLM fishery survey that we did in Terra Creek. It supports native cutthroat trout and speckled dace. It also supports a really nice riparian community. In the photo on the left you see here is that the riparian community occupies almost the whole valley floor here in a fairly steep and narrow canyon. It consists of alder, spruce, willow, and narrowleaf cottonwood species. That riparian community is one of the reasons that this is such a natural environment. This is a fairly low elevation stream, but that riparian environment provides lots of shading for the fish population, and it also provides the engine for the fish population. All those leaves and materials falling into the stream get consumed by the aquatic insects, and that's what the fish are eating. The natural environment to be preserved also includes a nice fish buffet, including mayfly, caddisfly, and stonefly. They're abundant in this creek that has typically nice, cold, clear water. So BLM quantified our recommendation for you today using the standard R2 cross methodology that we've employed hundreds of times before in recommendations before this board. I'll just remind the board that they're based on surveys in riffles because that's the habitat component that's most sensitive to reduction in flows. And we assume that if the riffle habitat is preserved, other habitat types like pools and runs will also be preserved. And that's an important assumption because on this creek, there's a very limited amount of riffle habitat because the creek's very steep and it's mostly a step pool environment where you have little waterfalls, a pool, and then another little waterfall. So to get the data to make this recommendation, we visited the creek during 2 different water years so that we could have a range of conditions. The flows during our surveys range from 1.82 CFS to 6.13 CFS. And we surveyed representative riffles, and the way we did that is just like we did it on the Dolores River, which is doing a reconnaissance on the entire reach and then picking some riffles that are representative of the typical channel slope and the typical channel width on this creek. So when we ran that R2 cross data, it made the following biologically based suggestions. It suggested 4.8 CFS would be protective during the during the warm part of the year when the fish population and the riparian population is active. And it suggested 3.9 CFS for the cold weather period. So that would be meeting 2 of the 3 in-stream flow criteria. This channel, as you can see in this picture, has very, very large substrate. Rocks this big are very common. You have the occasional really big boulder. And so when that when that's the type of stream environment, recommendations are typically driven by velocity, because with those big rocks, it slows the stream down. So you have to have more flow to get the velocity criteria met. And it also was driven by the wetted perimeter criteria. As you can see, this is a fairly big channel. When Jeff showed that hydrograph with the snowmelt runoff flows, you noticed that it went really tall and had a lot of flow in May. And that is what's driving the shape of this channel, or those big flows. It has to have a big channel to convey that much water. So after getting those biologically based recommendations, we consulted with the CWCB staff and on the gauge data, and saw that there could be some water availability issues in the lower reach. And so we decided to segment this reach into 2 reaches, as Jeff mentioned, one here from the confluence down to the Terror Creek ditch, and then from the Terror Creek ditch down to the Fire Mountain Canal. And the reason that we did that is when we get to the Terror Creek ditch during base flow season, that ditch is capable of diverting almost the entire flow of the creek. And in fact, a lot of times it does divert the entire flow, and you just see a little seepage down below the head gate. So that created a water availability problem during the times of the year when that ditch diverts. And so we decided to accommodate that by doing the following. In the upper reach, before we get to the Terror Creek ditch, for the wintertime recommendation, we have fairly low base flows in this creek. So the winter recommendation was reduced from 3.9 to 1.5 CFS. 1.5 CFS is what naturally occurs in this creek, and it keeps the environment going over the winter. And it comes pretty close to meeting 2 of the 3 in-stream flow criteria. So we were comfortable with going down to that rate. So the modified recommendation looks like this, as Jeff had on his slide. And one of our key assumptions is that if we're going to go down to that low of a flow rate during the winter, we don't think that the natural environment can survive also having that low of a flow rate during the summer. You have to have more flow and more physical habitat available in the summer for the fish species to complete their life cycles, and for the riparian environment to be recharged around the root zones by the higher flows. In the lower reach, the summer recommendation, the snowmelt runoff recommendation is what we settled upon, and we reduced it from 4.8 to 4.2 CFS, as you can see on the slide here. And we think that even though that's a short period, it's really important for the natural environment below the Terror Ditch headgate, because without that surge in the springtime, basically fish would not be able to use that stream reach for passage back and forth, and you wouldn't have any recharging of the stream side aquifers that support the riparian environment. So even though it's short, it provides a critical habitat and environment function. So this is perhaps the most important slide that I think I'm going to present today, and I say that based on some of the comments that I anticipate we might hear later on, and that is BLM made this environment with the assumption that this natural environment is it's consistent having this natural environment exist with the existing water use. There's reservoir operations that store water during runoff season and then release water later on. And despite those reservoir operations, despite the ditch diversions, despite the range in flows, we have a really nice natural environment out there. So BLM is not making this recommendation saying that we need to interfere with the current water uses, that those uses need to change. We're just saying, as a landowner that's trying to manage this habitat, we want a small degree of certainty of modest minimum flow rate so that we can ensure that those natural pieces of the natural environment continue to exist, and we think they can continue to exist without interfering with the current water use of the current water rights that are diverting. I also want to note that BLM has not made any sort of recommendation that that the board proceed with trying to acquire or condemn any of the current water uses out there. It's been suggested that perhaps this in-stream flow recommendation is a backdoor approach into obtaining control and ownership of water rights owned by other parties, and we're not recommending that, and that is not our intent at all. So basically, this water right will be junior to all existing water rights and practices, and we think it's entirely consistent with continued exercise of those senior water rights. So in conclusion, we think that the BLM and the staff working together have provided you with the information that you need to make the 3 required findings, that there's a natural environment that can be preserved with the board's water right. We've provided you with fish data, riparian and insect data, and R2 cross data. You have the information you need to make a finding that the natural environment will be preserved to a reasonable degree by the water available. The CWCB staff has done a water availability analysis, and we have adjusted our recommendation accordingly. And then finally, you need to make a finding that the environment can exist without material injury to other water rights. We've documented for you that this environment exists in concert with the current water use regime, and this is a junior water right that is designed not to disturb that current water use regime. So we think that you have the information that you need to make those findings. So with that in mind, BLM requests that the board proceed with this appropriation.
Yes?
Question?
Roy, I'm sorry to be slow and looking at my notes here. When you did the R2 cross, do you call them studies or evaluations?
R2 cross modeling.
Yeah. You said that these were taken in 2 different years. Were they taken in the same, relatively the same time, and were they consecutive years? Was it the same month?
It was two consecutive years, as I recall. It was 2008 and 2009, and we attempt to take measurements like this during the base flow period. It really doesn't do us any good to go up there during snowmelt runoff because there's just too much water to model. We're looking for minimum flow rates rather than maximum. So all of the cross sections were taken during the base flow period when flows are lower.
So roughly what months would those be?
It's going to be in the July through September timeframe.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
For the record, Jay Skinner, Colorado Parks and Wildlife and Stream Flow Coordinator. Just a couple of very brief comments. As a baby water specialist, working for Dennis Murphy, I have some exposure to Terra Creek. I used to sample Terra Creek for Dennis, water quality and flows. So my experience with Terra Creek goes back a long ways. I even remember it. But as is customarily the case with flow recommendations that come from any of our other cooperating agencies or private entities like Trout Unlimited or what have you, CWCB asks CPW to review the recommendations made by others, and in this case, I have reviewed the data, the R2 cross output, the recommendation letter, and the executive summary provided by BLM and CWCB staff, and other natural environment data. And I concur with the work that Roy has done and the conclusions reached, and then ultimately the work that was done post water availability analysis by staff and the adjustments that were made then. I'm basically here for any questions that the board may have about either one of these segments, and if we need to reserve time for rebuttal later, we'll do that, where CPW can assist in that regard.
Any questions from the board?
Good afternoon. I'm Derek Turner. I'm an Assistant Attorney General, and I represent the CWCB staff in these appropriations. You've heard extensive evidence that supports the 3 determinations today, and you have extensive evidence in your notebooks that support your 3 determinations that the staff will be recommending. The in-stream flow rules direct you to consider only the evidence and the testimony that relates to those 3 determinations. In its rebuttal statement, the CWCB did address some other related issues raised by Terra Creek Ditch and Reservoir Company's notice to contest in this proceedings. but the Terra Creek Ditch Company did not provide a pre-hearing statement or copies of any exhibits or a rebuttal statement. The CWCB therefore believes that the evidence you have before you substantially and conclusively supports the 3 determinations requested by CWCB staff. The CWCB will address any other issues raised today by the Terra Creek Ditch and Reservoir Company during its rebuttal period. And I'll turn it back to Jeff Basler for the staff's recommendation.
I'm actually going to hold off on staff's recommendation until we do rebuttal, as we did with the Dolores hearing. I'll make my conclusions and then read the recommendation into the record. Thank you.
Is that the completion of staff's presentation?
That concludes staff's presentation.
Okay. Right, so Terra Ditch now can come up and make its presentation. It has 20 minutes.
First of all, I'd like to suggest and remind everybody here before this gets too contentious that it's always good to make exemptions and not be too rigid. It's good for the political outlook and the way everybody perceives the agency.
Could you please introduce yourself?
Yep, that's what's coming up.
All right.
My name is Richard Rudin, R-U-D like in Delta I-N. I am currently the ditch writer for Terra Ditch and Reservoir and vice president of the board. I moved into the watershed in 1984, became a board member in 1985, became president of the board a few years later, and through bad circumstances assumed the ditch writer position around the year 2000. Eventually I was hired by the Bowie Mine, which is in our watershed, as a liaison between Terra Ditch and Reservoir Company, and so offered my resignation to the board, which they didn't accept, and suggested that I serve as vice president instead, as I do to this day. So I know Terra Creek from 3 decades of involvement, 15 years of administration, and so I'm a bit possessive. And so if this is public record, when I say I usually mean Terra Ditch and Reservoir Company, and when I say my water, I mean the waters of the ditch and Terra Ditch and Reservoir Company. So a couple of things. I really don't, this is going to be an argument more on principle than facts. I was on the BLM slide that just came up, having 4.8 CFS of water September 30th. That's a little optimistic. In 2002, I think, was our bad drought year. I don't think we ever ran 5 feet of water in the drainage ever, because in all my tenure as ditch writer, all these droughts, we ran water 365 days a year. I rationed water appropriately. I take good care of the drainage. There's no better operation to be had in the western slope. And I take great issue with somebody trying to piggyback my right for administrative purposes. I was glad Jed's here, and he reminded me of a comment he made in our initial introductory meeting when we were talking about what this was all about. I told him I released more water than is legally demanded into the lower drainage. And he said, well, that may keep them alive, but I don't know if it's enough to keep them happy, paraphrase. At this point, I'm really glad to hear you're concerned about the fish at all, and this isn't all an administrative takeover. Because over these years, like I said, I've always released more water to the lower drainage than is demanded by authority. It is true, they have a senior half decree. And in Linda's summary analysis, there's a statement that I read in her letter to Millie Hamner's liaison that release from the reservoir averages 3.0 CFS from June 10th to September 15th. Well, that may be a median, but it's not an average because it takes 8 feet of water to get from the high country to our diversion where we need 6.5 feet of water. 6 feet for Terra Ditch, half a foot senior to the lower faucet area and down to Allison Gannett. Well, there's a lot of years, dry, not drought, where that half a CFS cannot be met. It has been met, and it has been supplemented because Terra Ditch understands it has a very strong water right. We appreciate the common interest we hold with the farmers down below, and we have allowed extra water to cross our spillway and feed that lower ditch. We're seeing as we're going to talk about both. I'm going to pass around. I didn't know it'd be such a big board, but I'll pass some pictures around. How our diversion works. It comes down a spillway where I sandbag the water to move it to the side for the takeout. There is a proper diversion that could be administered to release that half a foot of water, and that would be overseen by a water commissioner who is here today. And if anybody doubts anything that I'm saying, he will verify or not verify according to what he sees as the truth. So I would suggest that you don't go ahead with the filing because I've heard as a goal, it is to protect the flows. And although I can't do anything about the upper flows to our diversion, I certainly can do something about the lower flows from the diversion down to the highway, if you remember the picture. On many a drought year, I have exercised my right by calling the water commissioner and saying, is there a half a foot of water available to get to the faucet ditch? And when he says, no, it's getting lower than that, I say, I want to exercise my right. And then I immediately after doing that, add water. And I have done this on my watch for 15 years. It would not take me, you can look at the picture and say it would not take much to tighten up the system. I can, for $800, dry this creek up to whatever the law allows. There are years when maybe there's half a foot of water going, and who knows what the future may hold. And if we get an Indian summer, I would suspect that the low down fisheries and riparian areas would be extremely negatively impacted. It is not unusual for September water, yet alone October water, to be really low. So I'm not here to protest. I'm here standing up as the mouse that roared, saying if you continue with this filing, I will dry up to whatever the law allows, the lower creek. In-stream flow, no in-stream flow, my life is the same. My ditch is the same. I have a problem with the way this has been presented and overseen. And basically that's my way of fighting the system. If you really care about the riparian area, if you really care about the fishery, then you will pull your filing and life will go on for both of us. And I agree, there's uncertainty about the future. I won't be ditch rider and president or vice president forever, but there's nothing to stop you 15 years from now from looking over this as an issue again. But I will tell you with certainty, as opposed to the uncertain future, that if you continue with this, piggybacking an over-appropriated stream, we all know it's not worth the paper it's written on, then I will do whatever I can do to make things worse, which I hate to do. I'm a naturalist and I'm an environmentalist, but first of all, I'm a board member and just, I don't want to see anybody else's name on my water right. I've looked after this drainage for 30 years now. The reason it looks as good as it does is specifically because of the work of the Terra Ditch and Reservoir Company. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Commissioner McLeod? Director McLeod?
Yes, thank
And I
you.
get confused with my commissions. Director McLeod?
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. I'm concerned about one statement you made, sir, in your final remarks about how you feel this wasn't correctly administered or overseen. And I may not be correctly quoting you exactly. What is your concern about that?
Well, maybe I poorly phrased. You know, this was in our first meeting informally in the living room. This came across as an issue strictly about fisheries, or so it seemed. I've come to believe it is now more about administrative piggybacking than that initial proposal. And, you know, one of the first minutes of our conversation, you know, this was proposed project was, you know, the birth child of the Forest Service to BLM and Trout Unlimited. Well, Kerry's here, and I've asked him, why in the world would you push for something like this? And basically, he has told me he has no interest, no dog in this fight whatsoever. And in my work over the years as a liaison, as a consultant, I always find win-win solutions, but you've got to have the truth to start with. And I think just the fact that the Trout Unlimited was part of the representation at our initial meeting and it really has no interest in this, one way or the other, it's just kind of rubbed me the wrong way.
So your presumption that this is no longer about the fish relates to the fact that Trout Unlimited is no longer involved?
My presumption that this no longer revolves strictly around fish is that I feel it's more about having the quote seat at the table down the road for any potential changes of use to water in the future. Otherwise, it makes no sense. That's my feeling, right or wrong, and I'm here to learn to get educated as well.
What makes no sense? You say it makes no sense. What are you referring to? What is it that makes no sense?
Well, if it's not a small degree about a seat at the table for future change of uses, and it's only about the fishery, and the riparian habitat, then I guess we're in agreement. And the status quo is the best route to go, which is just to leave it alone and let all that water go down the road. But it seems like from some of the other conversations we had that were formal, with a lawyer present, that the administrative part of it has become the dominant part of it. Now, maybe I'm wrong, and I'm willing to admit my mistake. But it seems like it's more about a seat at the table in the future than it is about, and maybe you're one of the people who's here to protect the fish. That would be great. That would really be great.
Well, we have a statutory responsibility to protect the environment, and that includes the fish. But I'm still concerned about this administrative issue. I'm not understanding what it is you think that this board's attempting to do beyond protecting the environment.
Could you pull up that letter, Terry, for me, please? Can you pull up that letter for me so I can read it? Well, if I can paraphrase, I believe. Can you pull that letter up for me? I think there is a goal, maybe it is an unstated goal of this process, to have a seat at the table, to work with ditch companies to enable an outcome more palatable to the CWCB in the future if change of use are nominated. And I didn't bring my computer, but do you have it, Carrie? Sorry, dragged it. Let me see if I can find this here, and then I can quote. Less than a minute, folks. Hang in there. I have it.
You got it?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm reading a letter, input from Gaspon and Linda Bassi. And let's see, this is kind of the summation of what was questions, like what's up with this, and I'll read the whole paragraph so nothing can be taken out of context. It is important to know that if decreed, these would be CWCBs and not the BLM with water rights. The Terra Creek in-stream flow water rights would be administered within the priority system with appropriation and adjudication dates of 2015. Holding in-stream flow water right decrees does not give CWCB, quote, a seat at the table, unquote, when ditch companies plan their operations, maintenance, or improvements of water storage and conveyance systems. However, the CWCB can participate in water court cases involving changes of water rights that have the potential to injure its in-stream flow water rights. In such cases, the CWCB works to negotiate terms and conditions with the applicant to protect the in-stream flow water right while allowing the change of water to be decreed. The BLM would have no role in this context. So that's what gives me concern, is that they do have participatory obligation or a right to involve themselves, in change of use down the road.
Well, it's not they, it's us,
Yeah.
We are the CWCB, not the staff.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
Okay. Just to be clear who you're talking
Yeah.
about.
So that was of concern to me. I think I've done a pretty good job in my tenure as administrator of this drainage. It has been improved considerably under my watch. The negative impacts have been greatly diminished under Terra Ditch and Reservoir Company's administration from what the natural habitat would have been. And I guess I'm saying the status quo is good, and I realize, who knows about the future, but there's nothing that'll be done today that can stop you from revisiting it 10 years down the road. And so I'm saying the status quo is in both our best interests.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Wells?
Excuse me, I have some questions too.
Sorry.
This is a rather unusual opposition. So should we understand that because there would be a 2015 right, and like any other right, it would be entitled to participate in a future change case should you decide to change your water right? Is that what you're concerned about? That someday you may want to change your water right?
I have
because there's a
no
20
plans on changing our water rights.
Then
And I
what-
can't foresee a change in water rights. We're just a small ditch company.
Okay.
We're not like the Overland that has plans for augmentation water and this kind of water and that kind of water.
Then what's the problem with a 2015 water right being able to participate in a future change case, particularly if you don't intend to be the applicant in a future change case?
Me personally?
Or your ditch?
No, yeah.
So I'm trying to understand why you would promise to dry up the stream if a 2015 water right occurs downstream from you that's only 2015, that can't affect how you manage your water right. I don't understand why you're so opposed to something that you would threaten to dry up the stream. I'm really mystified by what harm.
Because it's the only tool we have. That's why.
To do what? The only tool to do
To be
what?
left alone. That's it. To be left alone to continue to administer the Terra Creek drainage in a positive way that benefits both the drainage and the users.
How would a 2015 right change how you exercise your senior right?
It wouldn't. It wouldn't as far as the administration of it goes. I mean, it's a worthless right. It isn't going to change our way of dealing with the water one way or the other. And I'm here saying we have no plans to ever have a change of use. All of us are in the same place. There's not some people up high, some people down low, where all these ponds, which everybody is worried about in the future, these rich ponds going in and diverting water. There is none of that. Our bylaws say the water has to be delivered on Garvin Mesa. It can't be delivered up high. So why do you need it? Let's just turn it around. Why do you need it? Other than somebody nominated it somewhere and it just started steamrolling. What good does it do you?
It's a water right that maybe the next person who comes down the line couldn't divert against. Not you, because you're senior. So I guess.
What's the argument over? What good is it doing you to have it?
Protects the fish from a different diversion.
What diversion?
A different.
It's an already overly appropriated.
So.
It's not about the fish. It becomes about the future administration.
It is about the fish.
Well, then we're on the same page.
So you will protect the fish.
I will protect the fish, I being Terra Ditch and Reservoir Company.
And
when I pass away, you can revisit the issue. And you will have the time to see how your in-stream flow program has worked. Maybe you will learn some things in the next decade or two, to make your filings better.
How would you like to enter into an agreement with the CWCB to provide flows to protect the fish?
I'm not sure what the crux of that is.
Well, you could change your mind tomorrow, and as you've said you would do, and dry up the stream.
To whatever degree is lawful.
Well, that's good. But the question is, you have said you want to protect the fish. How about having an agreement to protect the fish so that you don't change your mind and dry up the stream for some other reason?
So am I hearing that if we sign a piece of paper that says we will administer the creek tomorrow as we have done yesterday, you will pull your filing of your in-stream flow?
I'm not necessarily saying that. I'm trying to explore what your point is. We have entered into agreements for water deliveries for piscatorial purposes.
I would sign an agreement that said, I will administer Terra Ditch and the Terra Creek tomorrow, as I have done yesterday, if you will pull your in-stream flow filing.
That's interesting. Thank you.
Any other questions? I'm not a board member, but I just have a question that might clarify it. What if it was a private entity who wanted to file on a consumptive water right on the stream, not for an in-stream flow?
I'm not that smart. Give me an example, please.
Somebody wants to build a cabin somewhere in the area and wants to have a garden and.
What is the area? What do you mean by the area?
Wherever you.
Above our diversion?
Yes.
Okay.
And wants to appropriate, a certain amount for ag use. Would you object to that also?
Well, our bylaws say that water has to be delivered on Garvin Mesa, and the top area of our diversion is already in agricultural use. It's a hayfield. So there is nothing above them with any water rights.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions? Okay, it doesn't appear, thank you.
Thank you.
That there's any public comment. So if staff has some rebuttal, this would be the time. Yeah, you can have a minute.
Again, for the record, Jeff Basler, do you have any questions for staff?
I have a question, Jeff. What's the significance of Trout Unlimited being engaged in the beginning and not being engaged at the moment? What relevance should we attach to that?
I don't know. I don't know why Trout Unlimited was involved. They were never a party to this. This was a BLM recommendation to staff. I don't know the significance of Trout Unlimited.
Do you have a map of where BLM land is? I wasn't paying attention.
I do, but I don't.
Where?
We don't have it on a slide, but I believe we have a copy of it.
Jay may have it. Or maybe just tell me where it is in relation to the Terror Ditch diversion. Well,
It covers the Terror Ditch diversion.
So that's everything from here.
Oh, okay.
All the way, that's all BLM land.
Okay, so the Terror Ditch diversion is located on BLM land?
That's correct.
Then I have a question. Is there any possibility that further discussion or perhaps education or something might help this situation? It seems to me that the opponent does not necessarily understand what we do and why we're doing it. I don't know that that would be helpful. I'm just asking the question.
Staff would certainly be willing to have further discussions, although I think what you're really hearing is it's a philosophical opposition to the in-stream flow program at this point. As you had noted, it's a 2015 in-stream flow water right. We're entitled to stream uses just as any other junior appropriator, and we have standing in future water court cases. And so I don't know what else to say.
Director Montgomery?
I have several questions. Maybe going along that line, do you want to just reiterate? I know you guys work really hard with all applicants to try to make them understand. Do you want to reiterate some of the work that you have tried to do on this particular in-stream flow?
Sure. Again, as I had mentioned earlier, when we met with the applicants, we had the original proposal that was on the table went all the way from the confluence of the east and the west fork of Terror Ditch or Terror Creek all the way down to the confluence with the Fawcett Ditch. Upon hearing their concerns that there is very little water below the Terror Creek ditch, when we investigated that, looked at water availability, we concurred with them, and that's why we bifurcated the reach and said, okay, we're going to have different numbers for the top, different numbers for the lower reach. The lower reach, again, is only for a 2-month period during runoff. And so I think one of the other misunderstandings is we keep on hearing people bring up time and time again that, well, there are years where it's completely dry. And we understand that. We're looking at a medium flow for water availability. And so, yeah, there will be times when there's drought. There will be times when there's more water available than is being requested. But again, looking at median hydrology, water is available for this appropriation.
A couple other questions. So I'm not clear looking at this. Is there potential for other water rights other than Terror Creek, the ditch company, future water rights that would potentially impact this in-stream flow?
A lot of the property, as Director Wells had just asked, where is this located? The majority of this reach is on BLM property. So I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know, but it's currently, most of the reach is in public land.
So there's not, I kind of see some blue land, private land way up high, much higher.
Yes.
Could potential new water rights much higher on the reach impact this section?
Sure.
So there is a potential for some future development on this creek.
Right, and we look at, when we do our resume review, we of course look at the entire basin, all of the streams, all the tributary streams to determine if there's a potential for injury to our junior in-stream flow water right.
Right. And then my other question is this 2-month proposed in-stream flow, right now, is it generally met?
No, it's met. It's generally met. As the opposers have noted, there may be times when it's not met during dry years, but if you look at the median hydrology, it is met.
Yes.
So I think what you're saying is you will not, even in those dry years, be taking any water that is senior to this flow to fill that right.
That's correct. We can't.
You can't do that under the law. You're not proposing to do that here.
That's correct.
So if somebody's senior to you on this reach, they cannot, you cannot call them out. You cannot bring water out of their ditch and basically fulfill your in-stream flow right with their water. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So I've got family over on the north side of Grand Mesa and Plateau Valley. I've got my dad's side of the family's on the Cedar Ridge side and the Delta side. I think there's, what you heard is a concern that, we don't want to have something eviscerate the priority system. And that is not what this does, is what I'm hearing. Is that correct?
That's correct. We work within the priority system just like any other water right.
Thanks, Jeff, for the clarification.
All right. Commissioners, Director
Casey,
Smith.
I've been waiting. Jeff, if you would, the gentleman, when he testified in regards to the reservoir water, would you describe how you treat reservoir water in your analysis?
We look at the gauge data. If there is a gauge located on the stream, which in this case there is, that gauge data incorporates any reservoir releases. We're a non-consumptive water right. The law allows us to rely on any water that is in the stream, whether it be a reservoir release or not.
Thank you. I guess, Jeff, I'm going down the same path as Director Wells here. It seems like everybody wants to go in the same direction. You're just about 2 steps away from each other. Is it that critical that we do this today, or could we have, say, 60 days to have a little bit further discussion and then move forward?
I'll leave that up to you. As I said before, staff is willing to enter back into negotiations, try to work with the opposers. I think it is philosophical at this point, but if there was a way, I don't know that it is critical. We could come back in November and make our final recommendation. But I'm not confident that we're going to get there, I guess is what I'm saying.
Okay, thanks.
If I may, I'd like to ask the folks at Terra Creek if there's any opportunity for further discussion that could bring us closer together. We have a statutory obligation to protect this environment, and we have an obligation to consider the recommendations that come from the BLM. And we are all here, I think, scratching our heads trying to figure out what it is that bothers you so much about this junior water right. And if we instruct our staff to spend another 60 days, are you prepared to negotiate in good faith to see if we can come together on this?
I think what Jeff said is probably true. It is probably more philosophical than fact-based. Again, we kind of feel like we're doing just fine on our own. I appreciate and respect what it is you're trying to accomplish. My personal feelings are that, sometimes status quo is good enough. Move on to the next case, see how we can maybe improve their administration of their ditch. I don't think you'll find anywhere else on the western slope with the water supply available that anybody can say we've run water in your drainage 365 days a year. I think that needs to be respected by you. And I also agree with what Jeff said, that we feel no threat to our priority system. There's nothing to be negotiated. It is absolutely correct. You're absolutely right in your assertion that that is protected. Again, I think this is, we're standing up for our private property rights, which is what we see water as. And we are a generous ditch company. We are generous with the watershed. We're generous with the people below us. We offer to send water to another reservoir company that when we could transfer it in certain weeks of the year when they had disaster strike a decade ago. And we think that also needs to be recognized, and the outlook of the Terra Ditch and Reservoir Company should be recognized. And I think some exemptions would be good for you to make. I think that answers your question.
So you're agreeing with Jeff that the 60 days is probably not going to help?
I am agreeing with Jeff.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Can I ask Roy a question? You've heard the question put to us, why are we doing this? What's your incentive for making this recommendation when we have a ditch, or I mean, a stream that's almost exclusively on public land, where no more development could occur? What's the risk that this environment wouldn't be protected if we don't make this appropriation?
We believe that there is some potential for development in this watershed. As Director Montgomery noted, there is some private land. There is a lot of mineral activity in this area. So there is, and there is water available, for appropriation at certain times of the year, like snowmelt runoff. So there is, in our mind, there is some small risk in, future development. And so that's why we're making, this in-stream flow appropriation. I guess, our perspective on it is, I've gone to meetings at the Terra Creek Winery, and I look out over those fields up there and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what Colorado is all about. I mean, it's beautiful up there, and we have no interest in, trying to mess with or destroy that lifestyle. We're just asking for an acknowledgement of, what's going on upstream. And I think, basically what they're asking for is, let's just keep the status quo and leave us alone. And right. And so my thought is that if you appropriate this in-stream flow water right, that is exactly what will occur, because it's a junior water right, and the only time that anybody from CWCB would end up contacting the ditch company would be if they filed a change case. And they've stated today that they don't have any intention of doing that. So I think it's looking out very long-term into the future is why we're, interested in this. But, I think it's unfortunate that, our intent to support the natural environment has, led to these conclusions and feelings that, they don't want to support the creek anymore to the extent that they've had flexibility in their system. I think that's unfortunate, but I think if we just go forward with the appropriation, I think the ditch company will get exactly what they want. They'll get the status quo, and people are not going to be bothering them about their senior water rights.
Thank you.
Please. I just want the record to indicate that the answer to your question about whether there was an opportunity for more development, the answer was the mine might have some potential for development during floodwater season when there's 60 feet of water in there. Who cares? Even you don't care if there's 60 feet of water in flood stage and that there's water taken out for consumptive use for some project.
Yes, we do care, as a matter of fact, because if they take the whole 60, then that environment is not being protected.
No, yes, if they take the whole 60, okay.
We do care.
That's
wrong.
That was something that I didn't mean. They're not going to take 60 feet of water to do a drill or something like that. But they can't take the bottom 6.5 feet, right? They cannot take the bottom 6.5 feet. If there's 60 feet of water flowing in early May, they can't take the 6.5 feet. They can take 53.5 feet.
I'm not going to debate with you, but we do care about that.
Yes, and I didn't mean to imply you didn't care. It's that there's so much, they call it Terra Creek for a reason, as the graph showed. You've got that S'more Channel, and in May, there is a lot of water there. And It's more than anybody can use. And I just wanted the record to reflect that if your question was, is there potential for development? The answer is really no, except in flood stage, when that water is there, and yeah, somebody could take some of it, but they can't take the bottom 6.5 feet.
I understand.
Yep, thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Staff will finish up then. In conclusion, staff has shown with regard to the three determinations that there is a natural environment and it can be preserved to a reasonable degree with these in-stream flow appropriations. Water is available for these appropriations and no material injury to water rights, decreed or not, will occur. As a result, I will again read this so that it is in the record. Staff recommends that the board determine pursuant to section 3792, 102.3 CRS and based upon the recommendations of the BLM, a review of the data and other information presented by staff and staff's recommendation for in-stream flow appropriations on the subject reaches of Terra Creek that A, there is a natural environment that can be preserved to a reasonable degree with the board's water rights if granted. B, the natural environment will be preserved to a reasonable degree by the water available for the appropriation to be made, and C, such environment can exist without material injury to water rights. 2, pursuant to Rule 5F, established January 26, 2015 as the appropriation date for the Terra Creek in-stream flow water rights, and 3, request the Attorney General's office to file the necessary water rights applications. Thank you.
Director McLeod?
Yes, thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. I think it's unfortunate that the motives of the BLM and the CWCB are thoroughly misinterpreted by the folks at the Terra Creek Ditch Company. However, we have a statutory obligation given to us by the General Assembly to protect the natural environment to a reasonable degree and to accept the recommendations of the BLM in cases like this. And I also think that if we accepted this challenge and let any group come in and say, go home and leave us alone, we would set a very dangerous precedent for the in-stream flow program, which has been a great success for the state of Colorado. Therefore, I move that we accept the staff recommendation.
Second.
All those in favor? Say aye. Oh, you want? Oh, we haven't had enough discussion. Okay, discussion. April, Director Montgomery.
I would just like to recognize Mr. Rudin and the fact that I think this board, I can speak for this board in saying that we appreciate the management that you've done on the ditch and the fact that you have helped make this a population of fish that is still thriving right now. And that the reason why I know that I feel like I can vote for this appropriation is because I feel like you're not impacted. I feel like this really isn't going to impact or harm Terra Creek. And I think it's unfortunate that it's philosophical and that now, let the fish, whatever happens. But I do hope that you will continue to be a good steward of the watershed as you've been, and we do appreciate that.
Any other discussion? Okay. All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion carries to establish an in-stream flow on Terra Creek. Thank you.
So we'll adjourn our hearing and stand in recess until tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock when we'll convene our regular meeting.
Mara, can you give us some instructions?
You want to just let them know? Did you just go over your channel?